Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Lobster. The Lobster is very much about relationships and humanity's fear of being alone, set in a dystopian society where being alone could turn you into an animal or have you killed. And also this film is a deadpan comedy. There's a lot of different kind of varying degrees of things that maybe shouldn't fit together but somehow do, through the very great direction of Yorgos Lanthimos, who I'm sure I didn't pronounce right, but his name will be down here every time I mention him because I'm sure I didn't say it right at all. He's a Greek director who previously directed the film Dogtooth and directed apparently a film between this and Dogtooth that I completely did not hear about at all. But I think this film goes a lot into how he perceives someone when they're married or when they're in a relationship and what that says about them as an adult and as a mature individual, and what that says about society and what these relationships or marriages or being in a relationship says about you as a person and how people view you as a person. And you might take this film as being anti-relationship, and I think while I was watching it I thought, is this like against couples? Should I be like offended? Am I okay with that? It's not really saying that. It's kind of satirizing how society views people in a couple and how you were viewed because of being in that couple. And I remember soon after I got married, how people viewed me after that was kind of interesting because suddenly I was like a lot more responsible. Suddenly I'm like this better person. I was kind of like, I don't know if I like am just because of that. I think that's a little disheartening, but the way a lot of people viewed me and the way people would talk to me after that was a bit different. And I thought that was kind of odd because I didn't think that much has changed. You know, I married my wife because I loved her very much and I wanted to, but I didn't view it as something that would change people's perception of me or do it out of any sort of sense of possibly being alone or dying alone or something like that. I always found that quite odd and kind of disconcerting. It kind of shows you how bullshit the world is in a certain way, because you're like, oh, so that's how I'm responsible? I don't think that makes you a better person. I mean, Charles Manson was married, although Hitler wasn't, so maybe they're onto something? I don't know. But the point being is that this whole idea that if you're not in a relationship, something's somehow wrong with you or somehow you're a worse person, when that really has nothing to do with it at all. And I think The Lobster's really calling that out. It is an interesting something after you are married when people suddenly view you as more of an adult, or if you have children, you're more of an adult or you're more mature. Certainly those things are certain big steps in your life, and they're big things to take on and they're big changes in your life, but that doesn't make you a more mature and interesting person. And I think The Lobster really brings that all to view. It's not saying relationships are evil or anything like that, but it is kind of bringing up the whole point of how society views you when you are in a relationship, and bringing that out in kind of this dark comedy, deadpan way makes it seem all that more bizarre and strange, especially since the characters in this film have to do that as an act of survival or be turned into an animal. A man called David, who after he discovers his wife has left him for another man, is escorted to a hotel. Basically how this hotel works is he has 45 days to find a romantic partner, or he will be turned into an animal of his choosing. His brother was turned into a dog, so that's why he has a dog with him throughout the film, and they ask him what animal he would like to be turned into, and he would like to be turned into a lobster. Apparently most people pick dogs, which is fairly unoriginal, but other people pick more exotic things, and he picked a lobster. And so he has to go through the other people in this hotel and hopefully find a mate so that they can get together, and so neither of them will turn into a lobster. And they have to attend various kind of relationship propaganda things, like if you're alone you'll die, you'll choke on something and die, no one will be able to help you. If you were caught masturbating, they burn your hands, all sorts of crazy weird shit. And the only way to get more days before being turned into an animal is after you have lost your time, you're sent off into the woods and they give you tranquilizer guns, and if you shoot someone with a tranquilizer gun you get to add a day onto your sentence. And this happens every day that they go out into the woods and hunt people. And Colin Farrell, who plays David, has to try to figure out who he wants to be with and how to hopefully get out of the hotel. I kept mentioning people bring up Buñuel, who I'm actually kind of a fan of Buñuel, or particularly a film of Buñuel's, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. And this feels like that. A lot of people mention Beckett. I don't know Beckett very well, so I'm not going to act like I know, but I know the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie very well. I've seen it many times. I think this is the kind of film that you can get kind of wrapped up into its overall surreal weirdness and kind of act like, oh, well, it's not really saying anything because of its overall surreal weirdness, and let's just talk about that, and turn them into animals, and there's all this crazy stuff. But there's a lot more going on, much like in Buñuel's films. You can kind of just fall in love with the surrealness and the oddity of it, and that's fine, I guess, if you're stupid. But like, if you want to go more into it, which is really the film's almost demanding you do that. And this film has so much in it about kind of how society views relationships. It's quite interesting, but also has a very sweet love story within it, which is kind of one of the things you kind of learn about relationships, or maybe I have learned about relationships through being married and so forth, is that when you meet the person that you really want to be with and spend your life with, the whole idea of making you a better person kind of goes away, because you don't really give a shit and you're more wrapped up into your relationship and what it does for the other person and how to help your partnership grow and things like that. And I think that's really kind of what the love story is throughout this kind of surreal weirdness, that as Colin Farrell actually leaves the hotel and goes into the wilderness with all this singledom, and it kind of gets into the whole like how we have all these rules in society and you have to follow them and so forth. And I like the kind of bizarre weirdness of it. This is a dystopian future, and you get the feeling when he goes to the mall with Rachel Weisz in one scene that something will happen to him if he doesn't have his marriage license, and that they actually had pulled someone over for saying her husband was on a business trip. Like, there's actual problems with people going out by themselves. Obviously, this is some sort of social control, which semi people do feel about relationships. If you're single after a certain point, you are kind of just an animal to some people. And it's kind of bringing that up, which is actually quite interesting. I like this director, Yorgos Lanthimos, and his other film Dogtooth, and how he kind of takes things to these really strange, surreal extremes, but is saying so much with them by doing that, and calling them out in very extreme, strange ways. In as much as Dogtooth is about, like, is it good to hide people from the outside world? Is it good for them, or does it very much hinder them and it's bad for them? And in The Lobster, it's kind of bringing up is our whole idea of relationships almost kind of hindering us as a society, and this whole dystopian idea. One character played by Ben Whishaw, actually to get with one girl and not be turned into whatever animal he was going, he never reveals it, I believe, but this woman who has constant nosebleeds, he fakes having constant nosebleeds to do that. It does get to the point that because these people obviously don't want to be turned into animals, they will do these certain things, but a lot of people do that just out of a fear of loneliness. They'll go with the first person who they have some sort of a connection to, and the kind of danger and the absurdity of doing that this is kind of your one shot at life and you're just going to waste it out of a fear of some sort of survival, which you don't really need to have in 2016 as much as you needed to have in previous generations, and kind of the whole absurdity of that kind of a thing. And I think The Lobster, playing with that as much as it does, is interesting. It has some fairly great performances, especially from Colin Farrell, and I think this kind of goes into my whole theory of Colin Farrell as an actor, is that when he's in more odder indie stuff, he's actually really good, like in Brug's, Seven Psychopaths, Intermission, things of that nature. He's really good. When he's put into these bullshit Hollywood movies, he's always awful. When he's in Total Recall and Daredevil and other stupid movies he's been in that are big Hollywood productions, he's never very good. He's a supporting actor or he's a lead in indie stuff. He really should just stick to that kind of stuff. Or like Minority Report, he's good as a supporting actor. He's good at doing these kind of stranger performances. In fact, he's quite talented at it. He's so kind of schlubby and sad in this movie and deadpan. It's almost surprising how well he can get that down, especially because most of the odder performances, the other ones I mentioned, are very dialogue heavy and more expected as an indie film. This is more of a strange art house thing, but he works so well in it. Olivia Colman, who's one of my favorite actresses or actors in general working today, is so funny in this film. She has such excellent comedic timing. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, she's just such a talented actress, and although she has kind of a smaller role, she probably has some of my favorite lines in the film. If you two have any disagreements, you will be assigned children, which was, I think I probably screwed that up, but I thought that was actually quite funny. Rachel Weisz is also very good. She's someone who's very good in more odder fare as well. I also like Leah Sedukis, as I call her, and Ben Whishaw. Lots of people who are in Spectre in this movie. That's kind of, I wonder if they kind of did one and then the other or something. I don't know. And then, of course, John C. Reilly. John C. Reilly is kind of just one of those reliable, great character actors almost. And in this, he does more of a character actor role in it, but he's quite good as usual. I think with The Lobster, it says a lot about relationships and our need to have them. within our society and our need to have that kind of a role within our life, and how that makes us view certain people and how it makes us view them as more responsible people, and how society has that within it, and how there could be a dystopian society where they realize we need more of these people in couples than we need people as single, and we need to eradicate them because they're not helping society. How very flimsy reasons are how we view people to be responsible and be more productive members of society, when that doesn't really mean anything, to be honest. That's kind of an interesting thing to bring up in a movie and also have a love story around it. It shows how great of a director this director is and how smart he is at doing something like that and calling out something in society that I think many romantic comedies try to do but can never do it quite as well as this. It's interesting when someone says something about relationships and how society views them and doesn't have it in a obviously rom-coms are dead pretty much, but The Lobster using that kind of brings up a lot of something that's going on through all of society that I think really needed to be addressed, and addresses it so well, but in a surreal, strange way that makes it feel even more absurd than you probably even thought it was. As someone who's kind of lived through that and examined it in my own thought process and thinking how kind of odd that is, it was something that after the film was over and I kind of thought about it, I was like, it is just such an odd thing. The whole idea of you are this better person because you found someone. The idea of like you're pathetic if you like die alone in an apartment, and that's like the worst thing that can ever happen to you. Although, the sad reality is, it doesn't matter who you're with. Dying is a singular experience and there's no way to actually avoid dying alone. It's kind of just something that will always happen to you and there's nothing you can really do to stop that. So acting like a relationship or religion or friends can somehow stop that from happening is such a fallacy of humanity, but we act like these things will do that. And I think The Lobster doesn't necessarily say that, but it is bringing up the absurdity of humanity, and it almost feels like I heard Colin Farrell bring up how he thought it reminded him of Kafka short stories, and I think The Lobster definitely reminds me of more Kafka short stories. It reminds me of calling to mind something that you all know is there, but no one really addresses, and almost addressing it in a surreal way makes you be able to say it and say more about it than just actually saying it. And I love that kind of way of storytelling. I love the way Buñuel did it. I love the way Kafka did, and I think The Lobster shows, and Yorgos Lanthimos, I think, and he's probably one of the directors I'm going to be looking out for now on because of how an original and different of a director he really is. The beautiful Irish backdrops of all this, and how smartly directed and wonderfully directed it was, and how much of a different film. I mean, when you say The Lobster, you'll immediately think of this awesome movie. And I think it's amazing visual feast and kind of a cinematic journey that you can really go down. It's a movie viewing experience that you don't quite expect, and says things that you don't really think you'll be confronted with. It shows a real master of his cinematic voice, but it also shows someone who can make a keen observation of society and show how absolutely absurd it is in general, but also shows how absolutely absurd it is that your alternative is turning into a lobster, and how stupid and silly all of this really is, but how it's still very much there in our society, and how calling out its absurdness definitely shows how absolutely there it is, and how much like the characters in this film, we can't really escape it. So if you have seen The Lobster and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.